what's going on, everybody? Isaac here with Civil Engineering Academy, coming at you again with another sweet podcast episode. I thank you for being here. Really do appreciate you listening. And hopefully these have been valuable to you as I've been producing them. I know they've been fun for me too. So, before we get started, if you need any help on resources, go check out civilengineeringacademy.com. We are ready and able to help you, whether it's the FE or PE or anything else in the civil engineering world you need advice on. Reach out to me, Isaac, at civilengineeringacademy.com, and we'll help you out. So in today's podcast episode, I want to get right to it. I invite Mark Wainwright of WainwrightInsight.com. And Mark is a professional sales guru. He has been helping practitioners and professional service firms with their sales for over 25 years. And he really teaches that anybody can do this. He really wants to help people get organized and really demystify the process of sales for the business industry, for professional services, where we have these low volume but very high dollar projects that are out there in the civil engineering world, and really how engineers, no matter what level you're at, really take part in the sales process of bringing business on for who you work for. It's really a skill that you can learn. Really being curious about things and asking, for clients' desires and needs and things of that nature. So Mark is awesome. I bring him onto the show and we detail a lot about sales. Maybe that's a cringe word to you, but I can tell you that it is something that all of us need to practice in some way. So having said all that, I'm excited to invite Mark Wainwright on. I think we have a great conversation and it's coming right up after this. Hey, Mark, welcome to the Civil Engineering Academy podcast. I'm excited to have you on as a guest here. How you doing?
I'm great, Isaac. Thanks for having me. You're doing a great job in serving an important audience out there. So thanks for inviting me to join your podcast.
I think you are too. And I think this is why I wanted to connect with you. So I guess before we start diving into maybe some questions and content, why don't you do a little bit of a background for us and let us know what you're involved in, what you do, and what audience you're serving.
Right. So I've been working with professional services firms for about 20 years, either for them or with them. Marketing agencies, architects, civil engineers, landscape architects, and even economists and financial advisors, so a broad spectrum of professional services firms, mostly in the marketing and business development function that most individuals at these firms would be sort of familiar with. Civil engineers and others are very familiar with that function. The last handful of years, I've had my own practice called Wainwright Insight, and I am a part-time sales manager for part-time salespeople. And I know that sounds a little strange to many in the profession, but I do view people like civil engineers as part-time salespeople because at least a little bit of their day, week, month is spent selling their services. That's an important part of what they need to do in order to keep their business growing. So I act as a sales manager, just a part-time sales manager, and sales managers do a couple of really important things. First off, they help build and organize the sales function within an organization, within a professional services firm. And second, they coach and guide individuals and teams in sales. So those are the two sort of fundamental parts of my practice, and I've been doing that for a handful of years now with a bunch of different types of firms, and it's been received well.
That's awesome. So you help, our audience obviously is for engineering firms, but you help with a lot of other firms as well, I'm assuming. Yep. And everybody needs to learn some element of sales, I imagine, to help the company grow.
Right.
But what do you find, Mark, is maybe the funnest part of your job? What do you find is most difficult part of this?
Right. The most enjoyable part, I think, is seeing individuals learn and then practice an organized sales process, or some elements of selling their services and doing so successfully, and really reaping the benefits of that, both sort of personally and also for their firms. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most challenging parts of what I do has to do with mindset. I think in the profession, and I'm talking across the profession of professional services, and this is for anyone who sells their expertise. I think individuals throughout their kind of educational careers and early professional careers come to the belief that the better they become, the more skilled they become at their craft, that will be the sole determinant of their success in the future. And there's so many elements of future success, and sales is one of those. So I think getting individuals' heads wrapped around the fact that they're how good they are at their practice is not the sole determinant on their future success. And there's so many other parts of the practice that they need to embrace and improve, and sales is one.
That's a really interesting thought. You've consulted, I imagine, quite a few companies. What are some common gaps that you see in the sales process, or maybe that they're not even really focused on sales? I've worked for companies where, maybe the head guy, the president, is the one that has all the connections, and then all the engineers are just turning out work, but they don't have that mindset that, we're not sure where the next job is coming from. If the work dries up with who the president knows, what are you seeing as you talk to consulting firms in terms of any gaps in this process of creating a sales culture, a sales environment?
I think you touched on it. There are senior firm leaders, maybe founders, that have all or the majority of the responsibility of winning new work. Mm-hmm. And the gap exists in the firm's efforts to grow and build future sales leaders. And that's what I'm specifically focused on, is helping those others who are maybe just new to it, or others who are developing skills in sales to become those future sales leaders in the firms. That's the biggest gap I see in it, and it's particularly evident in firms who have a group of founders leading the firm, because founders have a particular dilemma in that they're entrepreneurial. They've built a firm around themselves. They've usually surrounded themselves with a bunch of very skilled practitioners, a bunch of good doers, but those people aren't necessarily sellers, and they haven't recognized the need to transfer those other business skills like sales to the other individuals in the firm. Some have, but some have not. So I think a lot of firms find themselves in that place where they have a small group, maybe one, maybe a few senior leaders who do the vast majority of work. And suddenly at some point in their career, they turn around and look at their firms, and they're unclear about who that next group or who those individual sales leaders are.
That's awesome. So I imagine a lot of people don't particularly love the word sales, which is why you usually hear, at least in the engineering world or probably others, business development or whatever term they're using these days. And I personally, so my own background has taken me, doing sales, and I've had to step out of my comfort zone to do those things, whether that's selling pest control or making sales calls on a phone, doing those kind of things. But I always told myself that there was a valuable skill that I was learning, even though it was hard for me as an engineer to kind of do that. What are some skills that you can see engineers could maybe practice, or things that they could learn early in their career that could lend them into really trying to help do sales, business development?
It's a good question. And let me first differentiate, I think it's important to clarify what sales is.
Sure.
And I have a really easy definition, and I think most individuals are familiar with marketing in firms. Marketing activities are one too many activities where an individual in your firm, a marketing person, or even a practitioner who's participating in some marketing activity, maybe they're going to a conference to speak, or they're going to a networking event. By and large, marketing activities are one too many activities, and sales activities are one-to-one activities. They're much more intimate. They're conversations, and they're done between a buyer and a seller. And these are sales sales activities, and what practitioners need to improve are those kind of one-to-one interactions, whether they're prospecting, which is the early part of sales where you're poking and prodding around looking for new opportunities with either people that you know well or people that you don't know well. Or if you're actually in the sales process where you've identified an opportunity, it's progressing through the different stages. And I've managed to lose complete track of the skills. Right, there you go. Good. There's the skills. Right.
Yeah, engineers.
So the skills. So the skills that engineers have, I think they already have them. And I think some of it can be learned, but I think some other skills people already have. But I think we've lost a little bit of them. I've written about this on my site.
Yeah.
And they have to do the words curiosity and intimacy. And I used that intimacy term just a minute ago, but they're hard words, I think, for experts and professionals to get their heads wrapped around. Curiosity really harkens back to those days when we were younger and we were very curious about things. So we wanted to investigate and ask questions. And we asked a lot of questions that started with why. And I think as experts, we lose track of that because we're expected to be the smartest person in the room and to have all the answers.
Right.
So I think experts can regain that curiosity and really approach sales in a really authentic, just a curious nature that will lead to greater success. I think too much of what we do and what we propose to do in the sales process is built on a mountain of assumptions. And I think the way to steer clear of that is just to ask really good questions and to be very curious. The second part of that intimacy, I think as human beings, we all have this innate desire to develop long-term, close, trusting relationships. Mm-hmm. And when we look at business relationships, I think we don't see that or perceive the need for us to be close and codependent and to develop trust. So I think we need to kind of let our armor down, let our shields down a little bit, and embrace this idea of intimacy, which is just closeness, which is just being able to be comfortable and honest and straightforward and transparent with one another, whether they're colleagues or whether they're partners or clients that we work with. That's an important thing I think we've lost track of a little bit. I think extroverts and introverts actually have that. I think a lot of civil engineers probably consider themselves the latter, more introverted. And I think those are wonderful skills that introverts kind of naturally have.
That's great. That's great advice. Is selling the same as pitching?
Well, pitching is part of the sales process. And by pitching, I'm going to be really specific in the definition there. Pitching is when we as the expert, the practitioner, are doing most of the talking. It's when we are proposing an idea. So there's a time and a place for the pitch, but it typically comes much, much later in the process, I think, than most realize.
Gotcha.
The best time to pitch or propose is right after your prospective client asks for it.
Gotcha.
Which is to say that there needs to be sufficient exploration ahead of time where you can develop an understanding and develop an approach, and then come back to your client and say, look, we've had a number of conversations. We've come to a good understanding, which we've reflected back to you. Now I think it's time for us to propose a potential solution to this. And it's going to have some options and it's going to have some different ideas in there. And we can kind of pick and choose and we can co-create this together. And then the subsequent price that's sort of attached to that will have options as well. But I think that's the pitch, right? And I think that the pitch happens too early in most of these situations.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I really love your thoughts of really just trying to get to know people and in natural conversations, finding out what their needs are. And then these things kind of, a sales conversation just kind of naturally happens as you can find a solution to their problem. So I love that. With dealing with so many firms, how are firms missing out on opportunities that you see in sales? Is there a position? Should they be having a sales function as part of this that you see in firms that maybe is missing? What would you like to see a firm have to see more success?
Most professional services firms, and particularly firms that are in the AEC, architecture, engineering, and construction world, and civil engineers are part of that, rely very heavily on the reactive elements of sales and business development. And that's, I think, what we're typically used to, or what many of those professionals are typically used to, meaning a client or a prospective client issues a solicitation, an RFP, an RFQ. They receive that. They decide to pursue it. They put together a team. They put the puzzle pieces together for a response. They propose, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very prescriptive process. I think most of what I would like organizations to be doing is being way more proactive. And that's a term I think firms throw out a lot, that we need to be more proactive than reactive, but they don't know what that means.
That's true.
And I think proactivity comes from individuals taking the initiative to prospect, to contact existing clients or recent clients and have conversations about what's next. And it's not just, hey, I'm just checking in. I wanted to see what the next project is. It's really having an exploration about what their needs are, what their current needs are, what their future needs are, what elements of maybe recent work or past work went well, what didn't. And a lot of this sounds like a feedback conversation, and it kind of is, because those are important conversations to have prior to discussing new opportunities. And it's about having individuals embrace this idea of prospecting and proactivity, where they need to be reaching out and having conversations not just early. And I think people say, okay, we need to get out and talk to people before the RFP comes up. That's absolutely true. But the only way to really do that in practice is to just do it regularly. If you are in regular conversation with existing or recent clients, then eventually you'll find yourself in a conversation where you're asking the right questions and you're positioned well, and it's prior to the RFP, because a lot of times what happens is, that sort of cone of silence comes down, where you're not permitted to act. It's a strange way to buy. I'm just going to say that it's really odd that at some point you are now unable to have conversations with the buyer. Right? We're going to issue a document, and as soon as that is out there, you can't talk to us anymore. Right? And that's if you embrace the idea that sales is a series of conversations, the conversations need to continue, because you need to constantly be creating and co-creating. Look, here's what I heard you say. What are your thoughts on that? Did that make sense? Here's some ideas we have about approach. What do you think about that? Here's a price. What do you think about the price? Have we missed the mark? And none of those conversations can happen within that sort of cone of silence, which is really unfortunate. So this prescriptive buying process that most municipalities or other agencies use, and they use it to try to level the playing field, et cetera.
Yes.
But it's and I get that. I understand that. But it's very difficult as a seller to develop the level of understanding and rapport that you need with your clients. More often than not, when I'm talking to my current clients about their current work that they're engaged in, I say, "How's it going?" They rarely talk about the work, the job, the engineering. Most of the times they talk about how wonderful a particular client is or how much of a pain in the neck they are, right? They talk about the relationship, right? And that prescriptive buying process precludes your ability to develop that relationship first, because you're effectively dating someone for months or years, depending on the scope of work, right? And gosh, you better, be able to get along well before you start working together for that long, right?
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's great advice.
Yeah.
I feel like with large firms, and maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been involved with large firms where you get involved in some bidding tools, and all of a sudden what they want you to do is almost a reverse auction against other consulting firms. And so here you are, you've developed a relationship. You maybe have a master services agreement with a company, or you're part of a team of other consultants that they could draw from. But then you find yourself having to go through a process where you are fighting and beating each other up over pricing. I don't know how to avoid that, or if a relationship step should be made that they can prove, or it might sway the opinion that it's just simply based on beating each up over price. I don't know. What are your thoughts on
it's an incredibly challenging part of the industry. It is self-destructive industry-wide, regardless of what the professional services firm, it is an industry-wide issue where clients having no other levers to act on, no other things to consider, have to act on price, right? Mm-hmm. They have to look at a group of undifferentiated firms to pick from who all have certain expertise. I mean, realistically, a lot of these firms trade staff members like playing cards, right? And I'm not being silly about that. It's very serious when people choose to work for or not work for different organizations. But a lot of times they'll go work for a very similar firm in a similar jurisdiction. So yeah, they're kind of just shifting around. So expertise is kind of fluid, and at the end of the day, it ends up being very, very similar across a number of firms. Occasionally, one firm will have a specific expertise where it makes sense for them to win some work. But by and large, a lot of these projects are pursued by similar firms. Mm-hmm. So all the buyer is left with is the ability to choose with price, because they've gone through a very prescriptive process, which has stripped out any ability to differentiate.
Right.
And so they're left with just price, right? Which is the challenge. A lot of these firms base their price on level of effort, which means this is going to take us X amount of hours. We're going to stack a little bit of profit on top of it. Maybe we'll make it, maybe we won't. And here's our price, right? And all the firms do that, and they all end up kind of in a similar place. Maybe some are less, maybe some are more, but they're kind of in the ballpark. Pricing is a strategy. Pricing needs to be dealt with very seriously, and most firms, I think, err by not dealing with it that way, by not looking at pricing as a specific strategy. Buyers want to have options. They want to be able to choose. They want to be able to co-create whatever the solution is. And they want to understand how price is connected with all of that. And the seller also really needs to come to a deep understanding of value. What is the buyer going to get out of this work? And that's value, right? Value is what the buyer gets out of it. It's not what they get. I think what they get means that what they get is your bullet list of tasks and services you're going to provide. That's what they get, right? What they get out of it is this outcome, right? It's yes, we want this. We need this new piece of infrastructure because it's going to allow people and goods to move faster or better, and we will get X amount of economic development or business development, kind of out of that. That will raise our economy, whatever percent, whatever. When I talk to some of my clients who are landscape architects about working for park agencies, parks focus on attendance, right? Is the work we're doing in this park going to lead to attendance, right? That's their big metric. They want more bodies in the park, right?
Makes sense.
So it's important for these landscape architects to have that discussion with their prospective clients early on. How is this work going to impact attendance? What can we do that would increase attendance even more than you expect? What basic things could we do that might impact that attendance up and down? And I know it sounds a little fuzzy here, but the point is that pricing is a strategy, and pricing needs to be based partially on effort. This is how much work it's going to take us, and here's our reasonable profit. But it also needs to involve value. You can have two $10,000 contracts sitting in front of you. One could be yielding, $100,000 of ultimate value for a particular client, one could be worth multi-millions of dollars, right? So the end result of these two $10,000 contracts is radically different. And I'm not saying that gives you the ability to charge way more for the project that ultimately is worth more. It might, but at least it takes the downward pressure off that. And most sellers do not take the very critical step to understand and have that value conversation with their prospective clients.
Sense.
Right.
Do you feel like this is why some engineering firms get more work than others? Is that tied to a statement of understanding, or what's your thoughts there?
The statement of understanding is kind of a term I came up with, and I use it with the clients I work with. The statement of understanding is that articulation of an understanding. I think some firms do this. They weave it into maybe an approach. They weave it into other parts, other elements of a proposal. But I believe that a statement of understanding, and I'll get to the why some firms win more work than others. And I think it is possibly tied to this, but a statement of understanding is a very clear articulation and often just a reflection of everything you've come to understand about the client, about their needs, and about the work at hand, the work to be done. It has nothing to do with you. It's not a promotional piece. It's not, you need this, and oh, by the way, we're great at it. It's not that. It is line by line a very, very clear, 100% client focused reflection on what you've heard, what you've come to understand. And at the very end of that sort of understanding is, did we get that right? Is everything that we heard, is that correct? Right. And sometimes you'll get edits. You'll get a conversation out of it, hopefully.
Yeah.
So the statement of understanding actually builds from that very first conversation in an email where you send them back a note that says, great, hey, it was wonderful to talk to you. I appreciate you spending the time with me. Here's what I heard. And it starts there, right? You have another conversation 2 weeks later that says, okay, great. We've built on our previous conversation. Here's some additional things that you mentioned. This is what I heard. This is my understanding. And then a month later, when that big proposal comes due and you're going to send that in, you have a nice page that you started to use all those bits and pieces you've assembled. This is our first conversation. That's what we understood. And then we understood more. And then from your solicitation, you listed these additional elements of the work. Here's our understanding of all this. And from that understanding, there's just a logic in this. From the understanding, here is our approach. That's it, right? From our understanding, this is our approach. And I think that what happens, we just skip over the understanding. We skip right past it and we say, okay, here's our approach. We read the stuff. We made a bunch of assumptions. Here's what we think you need. Here's what we're going to do. And they get it. And sometimes you hit the bullseye and sometimes you're way off the mark, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so going back to why engineering firms maybe earn more work is, so you said those two were tied a little bit. Well,
that's all part of right. That's all part of the process. And I think some firms will win more work than others when they up their game, when they take sales more seriously, when they have a more sophisticated approach to sales. And there is a process. And the good thing about a process is that a process makes a ton of sense to a left-brained, analytical, technical professional. Makes a ton of sense, right? I think most technical professionals, architects, civil engineers, whoever they are, believe that sales is all of an art. It's squishy. It's ambiguous. It's there is no process involved in sales. But there are things that you must do before other things. There are things that you can't do until you've done certain things. And there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So I think once, like I said, these technical experts start to embrace and understand a process, sales starts to make sense. Like the fog starts to clear, the sort of vague nature of selling kind of goes away, and they think, oh, okay, this makes sense. I get this.
That's great. What resources are out there? Is there a recommended resources you might have to help people with sales? A book, a blog, even your own site? What do you have?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of books over my shoulder there, and I've got some actually on my desk. There's a whole bunch of sales books out there. Now, it's an important distinction point. There are a lot of resources out there on sales. Right? Mm-hmm. If one of your young practitioners, one of your young civil engineers, or someone who's studying for their exam says, okay, I want this to be an important part of my career, I'm going to go search for sales. They're going to be hit with a bunch of really crazy stuff, right? Okay. Stuff that has nothing to do with professional services, nothing to do with civil engineering, and content and books that are designed around people who are full-time salespeople and they work in sales organizations, in mostly larger organizations. They sell things. They are lower dollar, higher volume oriented. It's people that are selling, not widgets, but, typically these days, a lot of the salespeople are selling these monthly subscription technology or software as a service products, right? That's what you're selling. Right? Salesforce, CRM systems, accounting systems, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. You'll see a lot of that information. There's very little out there for an engineer who's involved in the complex, high stakes, low volume, high dollar, professional services sale. Mm-hmm. Some of the people who have done great work on this in the past, David Maister wrote the book Managing the Professional Services Firm. That's a wonderful book. It was published, decades ago, but it's still a fabulous book. He's since retired, but he has a wonderful website that has plenty of resources, and we can link to that in the notes. Sure. I've got some other books that I turn to. Any of the books that I turn to require a little bit of translation, in that they need to be translated, and someone needs to say, okay, this is written for a full-time salesperson. I'm only a part-time salesperson. I get that. This is written for maybe someone who operates in a different sales world than I do. It's not the long duration, complex, high dollar, low volume sort of professional services sale. Some of the books are, but most of them are not. So that's something to consider. But other books, I've got The Trusted Advisor is a book who was written by David Maister and Charlie Green and Galford. I'm spacing on his first name. That's a great book. Trusted Advisor is a great book. It's actually getting republished soon. Daniel Pink wrote a great sales book called To Sell is Human, and it's a nice introduction to sales. He approaches things somewhat a little bit differently than others, which I think is good and refreshing, and it kind of humanizes selling. So I think it's a great book. There's a couple other books that I love. One is not related to AEC firms, but it's called The Win Without Pitching Manifesto, and it's written by Blair Enns, and it's written for creative agencies, but it's a wonderful book that kind of shifts your perspective on what it means to sell high dollar professional services.
That's awesome.
And the last one, which is a completely unrelated book to sales, is Getting Things Done by David Allen. What I have found again and again is that a lot of the professionals that I work with have a challenging time organizing themselves and keeping their sort of task management kind of moving. So that's a great book. And he's got tons of resources online around that.
Well, you've given us a lot to chew on there. We'll link all those books in the notes so we can catch up. But I think everybody should learn, at some level, sales at some level, or whether you're pitching yourself as a potential employee to an employer, or working in an employment field and learning how to do business development and trying to get more work. Like at every stage of your life, at some point you're selling something. It feels like. So the good books, go check them out for sure. Mark, thank you for sharing all your resources and your knowledge. I've definitely learned some things. I'm hoping everyone else did too. What's the best way to reach out to you? What resources do you have on your site? Why don't you share with us the best way to get a hold of you?
My site is wainwrightinsight.com. We'll link to that in the notes, but I try to provide some good, useful information for both the kind of up and coming professionals and also people who are actively involved in sales at their firms. the one thing I want to make sure is clear is that people, civil engineers who are young in their career, who aren't necessarily leading sales efforts, can play an important supporting role. And in that supporting role, they can listen and they can learn. They can develop that sense of curiosity that they need to have in sales. I think just being around different selling opportunities around their senior leaders, they can start to learn more, and then they start to practice a little bit on their own. Selling's hard because you're not always successful. Typically, when an engineer gets a job put in front of them, they do it well. Mm-hmm. And that's probably, 99% of the time. Unfortunately, with sales, you are not successful 99% of the time. But it takes practice to get better. So that's what I would implore young professionals particularly to do, is just keep listening and practicing and getting better.
Perfect. Well, thank you for jumping on the podcast. I've really appreciated your message and your thoughts, and get out there and sell something, I think is a good one. So.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Isaac.
All right. Thanks, Mark. See ya.
See ya.
Hopefully that was pretty good. Coming at you. You got it. Woo!